Hello there, I'm Leo Walder for Kit Guru, and this little ATX case here is the Silverstone Precision PS11B-Q. The Q suffix is significant because there's also a -W. So Q is quiet. You get a solid front panel. You don't get a top fan mount. You don't get a rear fan rather. You just have a front fan. The side panels have foam deadening material, and the top also has foam deadening material. The W is open mesh and has a window and has a front LED fan because you can see it, and it has an optional extra position in the top for another fan. So the two cases are fundamentally the same, but the one is quiet and the other is W wind, possibly. You'd think A for airflow, wouldn't you? And the pricing isn't massively different either. This case is a penny under £41, £40.99, whereas the W is penny under £45, so £4 difference or 10% if you prefer, for which you get a number of differences, obviously none of which cost any great amount. I mean, how much is it to add LEDs to a fan, for example? Or indeed to put foam inside the side panels. But windows, they can cost a bit. This is being the cheaper one without the window. But we've seen cases with windows sometimes where it's up to £10 extra, albeit they can be quite well engineered. But in this instance, if you want the W, you're clearly paying very little extra for the window. But there we go. A quick tour, and I'll be careful because this case only just fits on this turntable because the feet are quite widely spaced. So plain sides, plain rear, plain top, plain, understated if we prefer. However, the front does actually look quite smart. Two optical drive bays, I've got a DVD drive in there, plus one blank there. And then on the front panel, we've got a power button, headset jacks, and two USB 3. No legacy USB 2. It looks very smart. I quite like the look of that. If I pull this bottom panel here, so foam deadening there, and you can actually see the sides are where the air comes in and flows through. And we have a 120 fan there, and an empty housing below. If you choose, you can add therefore a second 120 fan, or indeed you can upgrade the pair of 120s to 140mm fans. There's no possibility of putting a 200 fan in this case. That's not going to be. I noticed that Silverstone on their website about this case, so they're showing various options. They do actually show having a graphics card with a liquid cooler on it, and feeding through to have the liquid cooler at the front there. Although I didn't actually see it in the words, just a picture to kind of suggest it, which makes you wonder a little. I'll just take off the two side panels, so two thumb screws and pull. That's the foam material, considerably lighter than some of these side panels we get that have bitumen sound deadening. And take off this as well. Now, Silverstone refers to various options for fans with this case. So you've got two housings at the front, and you've got a housing at the rear, which on this model wouldn't have a fan in it, and on this model you don't get an opening at the top. You'll note there are grommets in the rear, so you could have an external liquid cooler, although quite who supplies those these days is beyond me. Now, I've installed a 120 Alpenfoam liquid cooler in this, which is a fairly generic sort of system. And I've put it at the rear. Now, Silverstone does not say this is something you should do. They don't say you shouldn't do it, but they certainly make no reference to liquid cooler compatibility. And I would say they're quite correct, because although the cooler goes in there and it works and it draws air through the back and everything's happy, when I came to put the side panel on, initially it wouldn't go on because two of the screws that hold the radiator in the rear and the fan were here and here, and that actually blocked the side panel from sliding home forward, all the way forward. So I had to remove them to do this. So were I to actually want to put a liquid cooler in that position, I'd have to basically take a notch out of the side panel in those two locations. So there we go. So if you do want to do a liquid cooler, you're going to have to work at it a little. If you choose, you could obviously put it at the front. I'm not mad keen on that. I prefer to have the air exiting to the rear or possibly to the top. Blowing to the front always seems a bit peculiar to me, but certainly doable. Now, if you look at this case, probably once you're inside it, even though it's a small case, it's quite shrink wrapped for an ATX, although it's 215 wide, which is a reasonable width, not massive, but reasonable. really, the standout feature is the space you have for a graphics card. It's absolutely huge because you have a short drive tower here for three 3.5-inch hard drives. You have a 2.5-inch SSD or hard drive bay there. There's another one of the same just under here under the optical drives, 2 optical drive bays, and then this great big gap. So graphics card, I forget what length they say, I think up to 16 inches. But basically any graphics card you choose, no problem at all. The thing with that is, I struggle to believe anyone's going to buy themselves a £40 case and then put in a, whatever dual GPU type graphics card for fortunes and fortunes. It seems unlikely to me. Possible, but unlikely. Partly because I think you want the features of a higher end case if you're spending fortunes on your hardware. But also, I think you want to give yourself more options when it comes to the cooling. Not in this instance for the graphics card, because if you do have a humongo there and it exhausts to the rear, then this case does it as well as any. And obviously if you did happen to have a liquid cooler going to the front, then that works as well. It's really about the CPU. When you have your CPU on there, the heat has to go somewhere. Tower air cooler fits there quite nicely. The only option as far as I'm concerned is a liquid cooler going to the rear, which isn't, as I've just demonstrated, not very clever. You could possibly have a liquid cooler feeding to the front. It goes back to my thing again, I'm not mad keen on the idea of liquid coolers exhausting to the front. Certainly doable, bit peculiar. But if you're doing that, then you get into the realms of, well, what are you going to put in it? You could build a Core i7 system with a humongous graphics card, build a gaming system, it would work, no two ways about it. This seems a strange way to go about it. On the other hand, if you're going for a Kaveri type AMD system integrated graphics, or indeed Core i3 or something, this will clearly work nicely. But in a sense, any case will support that sort of hardware. So I've gone down the alternative route. This is AMD hardware, because we don't do a lot of AMD hardware. It's an MSI 970 gaming motherboard, an AMD FX 8370 processor. That's the 8-core running at 4 gigahertz, and it's quite toasty. And then just for the look of it, we have an AMD Radeon branded SSD there, which is made by OCZ, and some AMD Radeon branded memory. I can't think who makes that actually off the top of my head. But it all looks very pretty, all very black and red. And that's fine. The graphics card is a Sapphire, I can't remember what that is, HD 7790 I think. Anyway, the point is it's only a small graphics card, mid-range. So up to the job of playing games. I just wonder if you're going to pay a fortune for a graphics card to go in a case that's this basic and a system that's this small. Possibly you would. Quite clearly you could easily go for an R9 290 without any problem whatever. So the thing is, what's the system? What sort of system you're building into this? I'm going down the AMD FX route because I suspect if you're going down the FX route, you don't want to spend money. So you want to save money where you can. Cheap case, if it does the job, great. And in fairness, it works reasonably well. Although building this system did highlight, it reminded me just how juicy an FX processor is, how much heat, how much power it draws, how much heat it exhausts. It really is quite nasty in that sense compared to Core i5, Core i7, which just takes so little power, 50 watts or so less. They're just so much more sophisticated. But the system worked and it delivered some grunt, and it's relatively cheap. Installation is quite straightforward. You've got 2 free mounts for your optical drive, so you slip out a blank, slide the drive in, clip it home. Hard drive, there's a lever inboard here. Pull that, there we go. Hard drive, no fasteners, no nothing. It literally slides in on these plastic rails and then clips in place. Very, very simple. Generally speaking, you see bobbins and such like for this type of system, or add-on rails. In this case, the rails are actually in the case itself. It's quite neat. It does, of course, mean your drive is mounted against the tower, directly to the tower. So if you're concerned about vibration, this isn't the best move, but there's no deadening material to speak of, no rubber bobbins or anything like that. But it works, it's very easy. The SSD there's a thumb screw, you take out a little bay, then you have to mount the SSD to the little caddy with 4 screws and slide it home. That works well enough. Same up there. That's all fine. I have to say the setup sheet stroke manual is the most hopeless thing I've seen in a terribly long time. Specification on the front, multilingual there, tiny, tiny pictures that at first glance all look identical. They're absolutely minuscule, almost useless. On the other hand, go to the Silverstone website, they've got a PDF manual there that's perfectly acceptable. and you can read it at a decent size. This does, on the other hand, show the difference between the W model and the Q model, which is vaguely of interest, but I mean, clearly you either bought the one or the other, haven't you? Again, Silverstone's website shows it off far better than the piece of paper, which is something of a joke. One thing, incidentally, the power button, which is here, is very clicky. It's sort of a plastic and it's kind of semi-cut out, so it's almost like a sort of a flexy piece of sort of material that then presses against the actual button underneath, so you get that click, click, click thing. I didn't much like that. I mean, it'd be a bit harsh to complain about it overly, but it was not great. But then we are talking very cheap and fairly cheerful. We do have possibly the world's largest motherboard cutout to give us access to the back of the CPU, and it's just ginormous. We've got various cutouts without grommets for cable management. On the other hand, the edges are folded over, so there's no nasty sharp edges. So at first glance, it's very crude. In actual fact, I wouldn't go so far as to say sophisticated, but clearly some thought has been given. So you can feed the cables through without cutting yourself to ribbons. There are a handful of tie-down points along this sort of channel here, which is where you're supposed, obviously, to feed the cables. That works well enough. So there are no obvious problems with this case. Installing the hardware, easy enough. Down the bottom I put a Be Quiet 400 watt straight power supply, because it's a relatively quiet, as the name suggests, power supply, and it sort of seems to fit with the relatively budget nature of this system. And with the foam inside the panels, it was actually fairly quiet when it was running. When it was under heavy load, it continued to be quiet, but it very much depends on what you do with the system. If you want to thrash it merrily, particularly with a big graphics card, the heat's going to have to go somewhere. So either you're going to let it get hot inside, or you're going to crank up the cooling and let the heat out. It pays money, it takes choice on that score. The FX8370 in that respect is a bit of a brutal test of any system, because it really is a hot processor. I think 125 watt TDP from memory. And you're never allowed to forget that when the thing sits. It sits here drawing 80 watts at idle, and then goes up from there under load. So the handful of features that Silverstone has supplied, the front fan, the option of a second fan, the empty fan housing at the rear, that's all good. The way the drive slip in, that's quite nice. I don't quite understand why they've chosen to support any graphics card on the market. Why that would be the headline feature is a little lost on me, when CPU cooling is something of a challenge, because you're basically obliged to put a fairly large air cooler in there unless you choose to cobble in some sort of liquid cooling setup. I don't get that. Again, if the emphasis is on quiet with foam and foam and foam, and a solid front panel with this convoluted air intake, which is a good idea, then I struggle to believe you're going to put in a £400 graphics card. It just doesn't seem very likely to me. So I don't quite get the ethos and the thinking behind this case. But the actual look of it, I mean, there's nothing to like or dislike about the top and the sides. They're just blank. The front panel, the pop-off panel, the I/O, all very nice. No problem at all there. But as you'd expect, I think, with a case, I mean, £41 is essentially free of charge. When you take off the VAT, take off the shipping charges, the fact it has to come across the world and all the rest of it, I can't begin to imagine what that left the factory for. You'd think pennies. If it costs them £10 to make, that would be fairly, that'd be about right, I suppose, and you know, it ends up being sold at £41. So what you actually have here is a very, very basic or very cheap case that is not quite as basic as it first appears. That would be the way of looking at it. It does have a couple little sophisticated wrinkles. The tool-free mounts for the drives and such like work absolutely like a dream. The styling I like. I am struggling, however, to come up with the what's it all about. And I think the obvious way to treat this case actually is to forget this ability to mount any graphics card you like. Just forget that. Instead, build yourself a basic integrated everything. Could vary something and go in this. Lovely. Be really nice. Or indeed Core i3, Core i5 without a graphics card. Absolutely like a dream. I'm quite sure of that. And then just seal the sides up and forget it's even there. Let it run forever and a day. But the graphics card capability, yes, it does it, but it doesn't matter. It's irrelevant. So there we have it. The Silverstone Precision PS11BQ, just under £41 at retail, which is stunningly cheap. It's a fairly basic case, but it's a lot better than it appears at first glance. This is Leo Waldock for Kit Guru.